Hey everyone, and welcome to my video where we're going to be going over what HTML forms are. So plain and simple, HTML forms are essentially just a way for you to get data over to the server. So let's say that you have the user input some text inside of a text box. When they hit submit, you can submit that information that they entered to your server so that your server can process it, save it to the database, and do whatever you want with it. So first and foremost, the way that you create a form is with a form tag. And so this creates the form element. And you need the beginning tag and the ending tag. Now I'm going to make a pretty simple form here. And I'll go over in another video some other types of inputs that you can have. But for now, I'm just going to make this form very simple. So let's dive into that. So first I'm going to be creating an input element. So I'm going to do input, then I'm going to give this input a type. And as you can see, there's a bunch of types here that I can use. Feel free to Google any of them and that I don't use in this video and familiarize yourself with them. But there's many types here. The most common here is the text. So we're going to have the user submit some sort of text input to us. So you'll see what I mean here in a sec. So now we'll want to give it an ID, and let's just say username. So this is where the user is going to put in their username. And then let's just save this now and refresh. So here you can see a text box. I'm zoomed in right now, so this is what it actually looks like. This is how small the text box is. But let's zoom in just so you guys can see. So let's give this text box a label. So this label is going to be for the ID of username. So this 4 right here and this right here correlates directly to this ID. So what I'm saying is whenever someone clicks on this label, right here, it's going to focus the username element right here. So as you can see, that's what's going on here. Now let's create another label. Let's do for password. And save and then refresh. Yeah, so we actually have to add breaks here. Okay. And then do an input and type. We'll do password. And then for the ID, we'll give this the ID of password as well. And then save. Now you can see when I type in something here, you can see it in the text box. And when I type something inside here, because this is a type password, you can see that it does these bullet points. And so think about this as like, a login form for the user. Now let's say that you want to have the user submit this because when they log in, they need to click a button that's called login, right? They enter in their information and then they click login. So in order to do that, we have another input of type submit. And here for this, we would put the value to equal, let's say login. Save, and then log in. Now let's add this BR tag here. Just to make it look a little nicer. And so they'll type in their username, they'll type in their password and hit login. And you can see that, it will submit when they click login, it'll submit their information over to the server. It'll do a post back over to the server, and the server will receive this, verify the user, make sure that they're actually a user, make sure that they entered in the correct information, and then if everything is good, they'll be transported to another page where all the private things are, like a dashboard for users who are logged in or whatever. So when the user clicks login here, how does the page know where to submit that information to? Well, there's this attribute for the form called action. Now, keep in mind that if you don't have this action on here, if you leave this blank, then by default, it's going to submit the information back to this to the page itself. So in this case, it's index.html. Now, index.html can't really process server-sided stuff, so that's why we need to submit this over to a PHP page or some other page, but we're going to be using PHP in our later videos. So, so for now, we're just going to do action, and then we want to submit it to user login.php. Now, there's another attribute for the form, and it's called target. So what target does is when you submit this page, you get a response back from wherever you submitted. And when that happens, you can specify where you want that response to show. So you can do like blank, which will open up a new tab or a new page or like a new window and display the response on there. Or you could do self, which is common and the default, so that whenever the response comes back, this current page will handle that response. We'll be able to see the response. And so again, if you don't have the target attribute on there, that just means that it's going to be self. Another attribute that you can do is called method. So here for method, you can do two types of methods on here. You can either do get or you could do post. So the default here, when you don't specify the method, is get. So it's important to know that both of these methods submit information over to your server-sided code. Now, the meaning behind get and the meaning behind post are different, and how they transfer information is also a little bit different. Now, when you use get, what happens is it will submit your request using the URL in a key value type pair type of thing. So, for example, if you were to hit login here, now it's not going to work if I do it right now because I don't have this page. But what would happen here is, let's get rid of this and let's refresh. So see, I don't have this page. But what would happen here in a get is, let's say I entered in information here. So what would happen is in the URL, it would do username and then equal and then whatever I typed here, and then the ampersand and then password equals whatever I typed in the password. So as you can see, this is very not secure. This is not a secure way to send information because a user can clearly see this information. But the way that the key value pairs are happening is by the input ID. So here you see username, the ID is username, so that's what's here. And then for the password here, it's taking it off of the ID of the password, not off of the type, but off of the ID of this input. And then it sends information to the database. And a get request is usually a request to get information. You're not telling the server that you want to store anything. You're just telling the server that you want to retrieve information with the information that you're sending. Now, with a post request, this is also kind of similar to the get request in that it can send you information back when you submit information. But the way that it submits information is not through the URL. It's through a thing called the request, and specifically through the request's body. And the request can have headers, it can have a body, and it can have like a whole bunch of other things. But the request is also not secure. So if you're planning on sending, sensitive information, send it, encrypt it first, and then send it to your server. But in general, the post request is used to tell the server that you're wanting to modify something, that you're wanting to insert something into the database, that you're wanting to change something in the database, something like that, that you want to manipulate something rather than just fetching it. Now, some other differences between post and get is that post, since it does it through the request's body, there is no size limitations on what you can send, on how much data you can send through by using a post request. But using a get request, there is a size limitation because it sends it through the URL. And the URL's size limit, I guess you would call it, is 2048 characters. So let's go back here. All right, let's refresh. So in terms of the types of elements that you can use inputs, you can use labels inside of forms. Now keep in mind you can also use these outside of forms, but you mostly use these inside. So inputs, labels, you can have things such as select, and then you can have option. Let's refresh. And then here you can see test 1, test 2, test 3, test 4. You can see that this is a drop-down menu. And let's say that when the user clicks this, let's say that we visually want to display, test 1, test 2, test 3, test 4 to the user when they're doing their form here. And when they click login, it's not going to send us to in the backend. It's not going to send test 1, test 2, test 3, test 4. It's going to send the value here. So make sure that you put the value in here. And so when this gets submitted to our server, we'll get that as the value. And then we have to, of course, give this an ID, test element. I don't know. And then, and another thing that you can do is something like a text area. ID, a lot of text. Save. And then you can see here that, this is a multi-line text box, essentially. And you can give it rows. So like, let's say I want to do like, 10 rows. You can see that this, became bigger. I can also make it smaller myself as the user. I believe you can also do columns. Let's do 10 columns, so 10 by 10. I think we got to zoom out. Let's do 100 columns. So you can see like how this would be useful for things such as like, if you had someone wanting to put comments on your page or whatever, you would have this text area. And going back to this select this drop down real quick. So one thing that you could do here is mark one of these as selected. So, by default, it's selecting the first one. Well, let's say I didn't want to select the first one. I wanted to select, test 3 by default. All you need to put here is the attribute of selected. Don't give it any value or anything, just selected. And you can see that by default now, anytime that I refresh my page, it selects 3. Another thing that you could do is something like say how many you want in here. So right now I have 4 elements. So let's say that I would do size 2, right? You can see that now it will always show 2 items in here at a time. So I could do 3, and you get the point. I can go on and on with it. But I like 1. And by default, it's 1. And to allow multiple selections, so right now, like you can only select 1 at a time. So let's say you wanted to allow multiple selections. All you do is you give the select element the multiple attribute. Let's save. And here, let's do size 3. So here you can see that if I hold Control, I can select and deselect multiple at the same time. Now, it's important to note one more thing. There is also an input type of button. Okay. Let's just say I am button. Save. Let's get rid of this text area because it's taking up too much room. Okay, so now we have a button called I am button, and we have another button called login. Now the difference is this one's a button and this one's a submit button. You can tell here by this. And the difference between these two is that the submit button will do a post back and it will actually submit the form over to the server side, to the backend code. Whereas if I click on I am button, which is a type button, It doesn't submit the form. So where these come in use is for the submit is if you're trying to submit your form and do a postback and submit your form over to the server, you would use the submit type of input. Now, if you're trying to just do something with JavaScript where you don't want to submit data, or you want to do some sort of AJAX request, or anything like that, where you don't need to do a postback, you would use a button. So anyway, that is it. I hope I didn't overload you guys with information about forms, but I hope that you guys also found this helpful. And if you did, don't forget to hit the thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. All right, thanks. Bye.